There's a moment when you realize the crushing weight on your shoulders isn't from failure. It's from saying yes to everything, being everything to everyone, stretching yourself so thin that even your victories feel hollow. You wake up exhausted before the day begins. Your phone buzzes with another demand, another request, another emergency that somehow became yours to solve. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice whispers the lie that's been programmed into you since childhood. You're just not strong enough. But Machiavelli would laugh at that assessment, not because your struggle isn't real, but because you've misdiagnosed the problem entirely. You're not weak. You're strategically incompetent. You've been trained to mistake availability for virtue, exhaustion for productivity, and the inability to say no for moral superiority. The prince who tries to hold every territory will lose them all. The ruler who attempts to please every citizen will be respected by none. Modern society has weaponized your kindness. It's turned your competence into a trap. Every time you deliver, you're rewarded with more responsibility. Every time you solve a problem, you're handed 3 more. Every boundary you fail to enforce becomes an invitation for further invasion. You think you're being helpful. What you're actually being is conquered. Let me show you something that will change how you see your entire existence. Machiavelli didn't write about weakness. He wrote about resource allocation, about strategic positioning, about the fatal error of overextension that destroys kingdoms from within. Because here's what no productivity guru will tell you. Your energy isn't renewable. Your attention isn't infinite. Your willingness to help isn't a bottomless well. These are finite resources in a world that demands infinite availability. The exhaustion you feel isn't moral failure. It's tactical suicide. You've been fighting a war on 17 fronts while your enemies focus their entire force on one objective. You've been playing defense in every area of your life while the people who advance play offense in carefully chosen territories. You've been trying to be everything while they've been busy, becoming something specific, something valuable, something that can't be replaced. This is the Machiavellian insight that modern culture desperately wants to hide from you. Scarcity creates value. Boundaries create respect. The word no, when used strategically, becomes the most powerful tool in your arsenal. Not because you're being difficult, but because you're being intelligent. The prince who can be reached by everyone is controlled by everyone. The leader who responds to every crisis never has time to prevent them. Right now, you're operating under a delusion that's been carefully constructed to keep you manageable. You believe that good people exhaust themselves for others, that noble souls sacrifice their own needs for the greater good. That strength means carrying everyone else's weight until your knees buckle. But Machiavelli would see this for what it really is, a sophisticated form of weakness disguised as virtue. Because here's the brutal truth. When you're overextended, you're not helping anyone. You're performing a cheap imitation of help. Your work suffers because your attention is fractured. Your relationships deteriorate because your presence is diluted. Your health crumbles because your boundaries are non-existent. You become a shell of effectiveness wrapped in the illusion of indispensability. The people who drain your energy aren't grateful. They're addicted. They've learned that you're the path of least resistance, the person who will absorb their chaos, solve their problems, and ask for nothing in return. They don't see you as strong. They see you as available. And availability, when given without strategy, becomes exploitation wearing the mask of appreciation. Look at your calendar. Look at your commitments. Look at the list of people who have access to your time, your energy, your mental space. How many of those obligations were chosen by you versus imposed upon you? How many of those relationships involve mutual respect versus one-sided extraction? How many of those commitments align with your actual priorities versus someone else's emergency? The Machiavellian prince doesn't ask these questions out of selfishness. He asks them out of survival. Because the ruler who cannot protect his own resources cannot protect his kingdom. The leader who cannot manage his own energy cannot lead others effectively. The person who cannot enforce boundaries will be consumed by those who recognize no limits. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming strategic. This isn't about rejecting all responsibility. It's about choosing your battles with the precision of a master tactician. This isn't about abandoning others. It's about saving yourself so you can actually be useful when it matters most. Every great leader in history understood something you've been trained to forget. Your value isn't measured by how much you can endure. It's measured by what you can achieve when you're operating from a position of strength. And strength requires conservation. It requires focus. It requires the courage to disappoint the many so you can serve the few who truly matter. Machiavelli wrote about the danger of mercenaries, soldiers who fight for whoever pays them, who have no true loyalty, no genuine investment in victory. When you say yes to everything, you become a mercenary in your own life, fighting battles that aren't yours, solving problems for people who wouldn't do the same for you, exhausting yourself in service of goals that don't advance your position. The most successful people you know aren't the ones who work the hardest. They're the ones who work the smartest. They understand that time spent on the wrong things is time stolen from the right things. They know that energy given to the undeserving is energy unavailable for the worthy. They've learned the secret that your overextension is preventing you from discovering. Power comes from concentration, not dispersion. Influence comes from focus, not availability. Respect comes from boundaries, not accommodation. The moment you start protecting your resources like the precious commodities they are, everything changes. Not just in how others see you, but in what you're capable of achieving. You've been conditioned to believe that strong people carry the world on their shoulders. But Machiavelli knew better. The strongest people build systems that carry themselves. They create structures that work without their constant intervention. They develop the ability to say no without explanation, to withdraw without guilt, to focus without apology. This is where your transformation begins. Not with adding more to your plate, but with strategically removing what doesn't serve your ultimate objectives. Not with working harder, but with working deliberately. Not with being available to everyone, but with being invaluable to the right people. The prince who tries to defend every border loses his kingdom to the one who chooses his battles wisely. The leader who responds to every demand becomes a servant to chaos. The person who cannot say no becomes a slave to everyone else's priorities. But the individual who learns to concentrate their power, to guard their energy, to choose their commitments with surgical precision, that person stops being overextended and starts being strategic. Your exhaustion isn't a badge of honor. It's a warning signal. Your constant availability isn't virtue. It's tactical error. Your inability to disappoint others is destroying your ability to achieve anything meaningful for yourself or the people who actually deserve your best effort. The war you're fighting isn't against your own weakness. It's against a system designed to harvest your strength for everyone else's benefit. It's against a culture that profits from your overextension. It's against the voices that will call you selfish the moment you start protecting what matters most. But Machiavelli understood something that your critics never will. The ruler who cannot preserve his own power cannot preserve anything else. The leader who exhausts himself in service of the crowd cannot serve those who truly need his strength. The person who gives everything to everyone gives nothing of value to anyone. The moment you start implementing boundaries, you'll discover something that will shake you to your core. The people who scream the loudest about your newfound selectivity are the ones who were benefiting most from your previous exhaustion. They'll call it selfishness. They'll question your character. They'll remind you of all the times you used to be available, as if your past availability created a permanent contract for future exploitation. This is the test Machiavelli warned about. The moment you stop being everyone's solution, you become everyone's problem. not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've disrupted a system that was feeding off your inability to protect yourself. The parasites always complain when the host develops an immune system. Watch how they react when you start saying no. Notice who respects your boundaries and who pushes against them. This isn't just social observation. This is strategic intelligence gathering. The people who honor your limits are allies. The ones who test them repeatedly are enemies disguised as friends. The ones who guilt you for having standards are predators who've lost their favorite prey. Your phone will feel different in your hands. Those notifications that used to create instant anxiety will lose their power over you. That text that says urgent will be evaluated against your actual priorities, not their manufactured crisis. That call that demands immediate attention will be answered only if it aligns with your strategic objectives. You're not being difficult. You're being selective. The hardest part isn't learning to say no to others. It's learning to say no to the version of yourself that derived identity from being needed. The part of you that felt valuable only when solving someone else's problems. The aspect of your personality that confused being busy with being important. That internal voice will whisper that you're becoming cold, distant, uncaring. But that voice is the echo of your conditioning, not the sound of your conscience. Machiavelli knew that the prince who seeks to be loved by all will be respected by none. Love based on availability is not love at all. It's dependency dressed up as affection. The people who truly care about you will understand when you start protecting your energy. They'll respect your need to focus. They'll support your decision to become strategic rather than reactive. But there's another group that will reveal themselves in this process. The energy vampires who have been feeding off your inability to establish limits. They'll escalate their demands. They'll create bigger emergencies. They'll manufacture crises designed to pull you back into their chaos. This isn't coincidence. This is strategy. They've learned that your boundaries weaken under pressure, so they apply more pressure. Here's where most people fail. They cave. They apologize for having standards. They explain their decisions until their boundaries become negotiations. They think they can gradually reduce their availability without anyone noticing. But gradual change in this area is ineffective change. The people who've been exploiting your accessibility will fight every inch of territory you try to reclaim. The Machiavellian approach is different. It's decisive. It's final. It's implemented with the calm certainty of someone who has calculated the cost of continuing versus the cost of change. You don't announce your new boundaries. You simply start enforcing them. You don't debate their validity. You make them non-negotiable through your actions, not your explanations. This is psychological warfare, and you've been losing because you didn't know you were fighting. Every time someone asks for just 5 minutes of your time, they're testing your defenses. Every time someone presents their problem as your emergency, they're probing for weakness. Every time someone reminds you how you used to handle their issues, they're attempting to reinstall old programming. The strategic response isn't emotional, it's systematic. You develop standard responses that protect your position without revealing your strategy. I'm not available for that. That doesn't work for my schedule. I won't be able to help with that. Notice the language. No explanations. No justifications. No apologies for having priorities that don't include their demands. Your calendar becomes a fortress. Your attention becomes a scarce resource. Your energy becomes something that must be earned, not assumed. This isn't about becoming antisocial. It's about becoming intentional. The difference between these two states is the difference between random kindness and strategic generosity. Random kindness responds to whoever asks loudest. Strategic generosity invests in relationships that create mutual value. Random kindness exhausts itself trying to solve every problem. Strategic generosity focuses on problems that align with your mission. Random kindness measures success by how many people you've helped. Strategic generosity measures success by the depth of impact you've created. When you operate from strategic generosity, something remarkable happens. The quality of your relationships improves dramatically. The people who remain in your life are there because they value you, not because they need you. Your contributions become more significant because they're concentrated rather than scattered. Your influence grows because your energy is focused rather than dispersed. But the transformation goes deeper than external relationships. Your relationship with yourself fundamentally shifts. That constant background anxiety that comes from having too many commitments starts to fade. The mental fog that results from trying to track 17 different responsibilities begins to clear. The physical exhaustion that accompanies emotional overextension slowly dissipates. You start to remember what it feels like to have margin in your life, space to think, time to plan, energy to pursue goals that matter to you rather than problems that belong to others. This isn't luxury. This is basic human functionality that's been stolen from you by a culture that profits from your perpetual availability. The people who matter most in your life will notice the change, not because you're giving them less, but because what you're giving them is higher quality. Your presence becomes more valuable because it's not divided among dozens of competing priorities. Your advice carries more weight because it's not rushed between other obligations. Your support becomes more meaningful because it's chosen rather than automatic. This is the Machiavellian paradox. By becoming more selective about who receives your energy, you become more valuable to everyone who truly deserves it. By establishing boundaries that others must respect, you create relationships based on mutual regard rather than one-sided extraction. By refusing to be everything to everyone, you become something significant to the people who matter. The path from overextension to strategic focus isn't comfortable. It requires disappointing people who've grown accustomed to your unlimited availability. It demands saying no to requests that feel reasonable in isolation, but become overwhelming in accumulation. It means accepting that some people will call you selfish for refusing to sacrifice your well-being for their convenience. But Machiavelli understood what your critics never will. The person who cannot protect their own resources cannot protect anyone else's. The leader who exhausts themselves meeting every demand cannot lead when leadership is truly needed. The individual who spreads themselves too thin becomes useless to everyone, including themselves. Your transformation doesn't end with establishing boundaries. It begins there. Because once you've reclaimed your energy from the chaos of overextension, you face a new challenge. What do you do with this newfound power? How do you deploy your concentrated resources to maximum effect? This is where most people stumble. They protect their time and energy, but fail to invest it strategically. Machiavelli would remind you that unused power is wasted power. The prince who hoards his strength without deploying it effectively is no different from the one who squanders it carelessly. Both end up conquered by those who understand that power exists to be wielded, not preserved. Your energy, your attention, your capabilities, these aren't meant to sit idle. They're meant to build something that matters. Look at the successful people around you. Not the busy ones who mistake motion for progress, but the ones who achieve disproportionate results with seemingly less effort. They've mastered something you're just beginning to understand. They know the difference between being productive and being effective. Productivity measures how much you do. Effectiveness measures whether what you do matters. The overextended person tries to be productive everywhere. The strategic person chooses to be effective somewhere specific. This choice, this focus, this willingness to excel in selected areas while ignoring others entirely, that's what separates leaders from followers. That's what distinguishes influence from activity. When you stop saying yes to everything, you create space for something revolutionary. The ability to say yes to the right things with full commitment. Your partial attention scattered across dozens of priorities becomes total focus applied to carefully chosen objectives. Your diluted effort spread thin across multiple fronts becomes concentrated force applied to strategic targets. The results aren't just different, they're exponential. Because focused energy doesn't add to your capabilities, it multiplies them. The person who applies full attention to one goal achieves more than the person who applies partial attention to 10 goals. This isn't just efficiency. This is the mathematics of impact. But here's where it gets dangerous. Once you start operating from this position of concentrated strength, once you start achieving results that seemed impossible when you were overextended, the world will try to drag you back into the chaos you escaped. Success makes you a target for new demands. Achievement creates new expectations. Your newfound effectiveness becomes an invitation for others to overload you once again. This is the test that determines whether your transformation is permanent or temporary. Will you defend your strategic position when it's challenged? Will you maintain your boundaries when they're tested by new pressures? Will you remember that your current success depends on the very selectivity that others will try to convince you to abandon? The voices will be persuasive. They'll remind you of your capabilities. They'll appeal to your sense of responsibility. They'll suggest that your success obligates you to take on more, do more, be more available. But Machiavelli knew that success creates its own vulnerabilities. The prince who cannot resist the temptation to overextend his victories will lose everything he fought to achieve. Your no must become stronger as your capabilities grow. Your boundaries must become firmer as your influence expands. Your selectivity must become more refined as your options multiply. This isn't arrogance. This is preservation of the strategic position that made your success possible in the first place. The moment you forget that your strength comes from concentration, not dispersion, you begin the slide back toward overextension. The moment you start believing you can handle just a little more, you reopen the door to the chaos you fought to escape. The moment you think your boundaries can be relaxed because you're stronger now, you reveal that you haven't learned the lesson at all. Machiavelli's final wisdom on this matter is the most important. The prince who conquers territory must decide whether to rule it directly or through others. The person who develops capabilities must decide whether to deploy them personally or systematically. Your energy is territory you've conquered. Your attention is ground you've reclaimed. Your time is a kingdom you now rule. Rule it wisely. Delegate what can be delegated. Systematize what can be systematized. Focus personally only on what requires your unique capabilities. This isn't about doing less. This is about ensuring that what you do creates maximum impact with minimum waste. You are not weak. You never were. You were simply operating under a flawed strategy that confused exhaustion with effectiveness, availability with value, accommodation with strength. Now you know better. Now you can choose better. Now you can build something that lasts instead of burning yourself out in service of other people's temporary needs. The war against overextension is won not through a single battle, but through daily decisions that honor your strategic position. Every no that protects your focus. Every boundary that preserves your energy. Every choice that prioritizes long-term effectiveness over short-term accommodation. These aren't selfish acts. They're strategic necessities that enable you to serve your highest purpose instead of everyone else's immediate convenience. Machiavelli understood that the greatest strength isn't the ability to endure everything. It's the wisdom to choose what deserves your endurance. That wisdom is now yours. Use it carefully. Use it consistently. Use it without apology. Because the world needs what you can build when you're operating from strength, not what you can survive when you're stretched to the breaking point. Your overextension was never a sign of weakness. It was a sign that you cared more about others than you cared about your own strategic position. But caring without strategy is just another form of chaos. Now you can care strategically. Now you can help effectively. Now you can make the impact you always wanted to make, but couldn't achieve when your power was scattered across too many fronts. This is your moment. Not to prove you're not weak, but to prove you're strategically intelligent. Not to show you can handle everything, but to demonstrate you can achieve something significant. Not to be available to everyone, but to be invaluable to the people and purposes that truly matter. The choice is yours. Remain overextended and mistake exhaustion for virtue. Or become strategic and discover what you're actually capable of achieving when your power is concentrated rather than dispersed. Machiavelli already showed you the way. The only question now is whether you have the courage to follow it.